the panel is gonna be about learning from COVID-19 pandemics, opportunities and challenges for young environmental epidemiologists. And we have two wonderful chairs or moderators that are gonna be guiding this discussion today. They are Temitope Adebayo and Masha Davidovic. They are both PhD students of the Swiss Tropical and Public Health Institute. And just as a brief note, they were finalists last year of a kind of a special contest that there's in the Swiss Public Health School, and which what we call the Flash Talks. And they showed to be an excellent communicator. So that's why we thought that they were the perfect, let's say, researchers responsible for this, taking this role. So please, Masha, Temi, the floor is yours. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Hannah, for the kind introduction. So I would like to welcome everyone to this special plenary. It's special because you're here and because of the speakers that we have in our midst. But before we get to the speakers, I just want you all to relax and kick your socks off, kick your shoes off, lay your legs up on the sofa, whatever. Just be very relaxed, because this is your time to take in as much information as you can from these giants that we'll be talking to. So grab a cup of coffee, whatever you need, but get ready, because this is going to be a great conversation that we're about to have. And Masha, I would like to pass the mic over to you.
Thank you, Temi. And right at the moment when we have 100 participants online already with us. So it's really my huge pleasure to chair together with Temi today this special plenary session. And we have some great guests with us. But you will meet them very soon. And today our discussion will focus on the impact of COVID-19 at our research work, but also what are the lessons we learned through pandemic and what are the roles for future young scientists. But firstly, before we start, just few technical details. At the second part of this plenary session, we will open the floor for questions and answers from the audience. So please feel free to post your questions or any thoughts and comments you have in the chat of the Zoom. And later, Temi and I will keep eyes on and follow up with your questions. We are also inviting you to tweet this event, and don't forget to use hashtag, which is ISEE Young 2021. So please, Temi, over to you.
Thank you so much, Masha. So first things first, we just want to get a few information from you, and we're going to get this information with the use of a poll. So we would like you to go to the chat or use your phone to take a picture of the QR code that will be on your screen anytime now, or just go to the link and answer the questions. And we're going to run through the answers in about 5 minutes. And from after that, then we go into our conversation. So the poll is now there because Sarah has posted it. So please go to the link and answer the questions, and the QR code is on your screen.
So if you visit this website, you can use the code SwissDPH285, and we already see, oh, I'm so sorry, we have a mistake. This is not the first question, so I will stop sharing screen for the second to start over with the right question. This is always a challenge with these modern technologies, but luckily this is corrected already. Great, I'm just sharing screen. We already received some answers from the first question.
All right. Oh, people are smiling. This is good. Okay, thank you so much. This is very encouraging. We see a lot of people are happy, 46%, and people are excited, 24%. Excitement again at 22%. This is good. Glad to see that no one is yawning at this point. That's very encouraging. Thank you so much. Okay. Overall, it's been a great experience, and 5% are still undecisive. Hopefully, by the next session, you'll be able to make up your mind. So the next question is, where are you attending from? Canada. That's nice. France. England. Oh, awesome. Spain, Switzerland. Of course, we're dominating because it's hosted right here in Basel at the Swiss Tropical Health Institute. We see a lot of people also coming from Finland. Thank you so much for joining us. Denmark and Kenya and Belgium. It's looking good. And the Netherlands. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's amazing seeing
Someone
people from
Portugal.
all around, not only Europe, but the world. It's really impressive. It's so great. We already have 103 participants with us.
Awesome.
The next question.
Responses.
We want to see what is your main area of research. So what your research is focused on. And of course, we see the air pollution, which is the biggest letters, means that the most answers is very dominant here, was as we expected. Occupational exposure, mental, tobacco, of so many words, noise, green space, climate change. Very interesting to see such a diverse research focuses.
Okay, and talking about currently, how has COVID impacted your work, which we've been all dealing with COVID for the past year now. Okay, the numbers are coming in. Majority are saying nothing at all. That is very good to know. That's really interesting. We're glad. Okay, 2% of the people have changed their topic at the moment, very superficially at 34%, but majority are saying not at all. Okay, that's good. We're happy for you.
But we also want to see how pandemic influenced your research. So is there any aspects of your research that has been affected by pandemic so far? For sure, everyone had some impact of data collection. Of course, we are all dealing with that problem.
Social interaction, loneliness, these are very important things to actually address. Yes, we can relate to that. Time, field work, we can't travel at the moment, unfortunately.
Networking as well.
Mm-hmm. Great, but we all hope you are staying maxed and remaining distance. That's social distance, not physical distance. You can always, talk to your friends over the phone. But yeah, we can beat this pandemic as long as we just follow the rules and regulations that have been put to us by our government and scientists. But thank you so much, everyone, for participating. This is great.
We have one more question, Tammy. The last question we want to ask you, we really want to try to focus on positive aspects of pandemic. So did you identify any opportunities that pandemic brought to you? Zoom, communication skills, definitely something very useful to have these days.
Absolutely, Nasha.
Value more nature.
Yeah. Yes, we love that.
Zoom skills, nowadays we all must have these skills as well. Work from home, for someone, this is definitely a good opportunity. Nothing. Interesting.
Working from home, that's good.
Time. I hope so. This is more time for yourself and your family to spend with.
Okay, Masha, maybe we will take these answers and probably summarize them later because they keep coming in and we can't keep up at this point. Masha, what do you think?
I fully agree. I can summarize these answers and come back very soon with them.
Great. So I would like to say thank you to everyone for participating. At least now we know some of us were on the same page and we can all relate to one another, that we are not in this by ourselves. And Masha, I would give you the honors to do the first introduction, if you don't mind.
Absolutely not. I'm fully delighted to present you our first speaker today. Her name is Professor Dr. Barbara Hoffman, and she's professor at the Institute for Occupational, Social and Environmental Medicine at Heinrich Heine University of Düsseldorf. She has a remarkable experience in environmental epidemiology, and she is an outstanding researcher. She investigates the effects of environmental pollutants, specifically air pollution, on human health. Professor Hoffman is principal investigator for several large-scale cohort studies, and she is involved in many national and international projects. So welcome.
Thank you very much, Masha.
And it is my great pleasure to introduce to you and present to others who might not know him yet. But today we have Professor Sir Andy Haynes. He is a professor of environmental change in public health in the Department of Population Health at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. He also chairs the Lancet Pathfinder Commission on Health in the Zero Carbon Economy and Inter-Academic Partnership Working Group on Climate Change and Health. Professor Haynes is also participates in Lancet Commission Pollution and Lancet Commission on COVID-19 Response. He was the director at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine for nearly 10 years and chaired many other working groups and committees such as the Rockefeller Foundation, Lancet Commission on Planetary Health, and the European Academy Science Advisory Committee Working Group. Thank you so much for joining us, Professor Haynes. And finally, so delighted, absolutely, to introduce to you Professor Manolis Cajavinas, who is a leading expert in his field. He is currently the scientific director of the Severo Ochoa Distinction at Barcelona Institute for Global Health, which we all know as IS Global. His research focuses on cancer, water pollution, non-communicable diseases, and environment. In his capacity, he serves on several expert committees, such as the WHO and the EU Research Evaluation Committee. He was the president of this very society, which is the International Society of Environmental Epidemiology. Thank you so much for being here, Professor Cajavinas. And I want to say, this people, this giants of whose shoulders we stand on, if we were to go through their qualifications and the positions they occupy, let me tell you, we would need a whole day at the conference to get through it. So I would like to encourage you to read their bios, engage with their work, because there are tons of them out there. Engage with their work, watch their YouTube videos, and make sure you follow Professor Cajavinas on Twitter, okay? So thank you so much for being here, and let's get right into this conversation.
Thank you, Tammy. You're fully right with that. So we will now move to the first round of questions. In total, we will have 3 rounds and approximately around 30 minutes of discussion with our speakers. And I just want to use the opportunity to remind all participants to post your questions and comments in chat, because later on we will try together with our speakers to address as much as possible questions you have. Tammy, over to you.
And don't forget, we can trend on Twitter as long as you use the ISEE Young 2021. So the first question I'd like to ask, and I would like for Professor Hoffman to answer first, Professor Cajavinas and Professor Haynes. And my question here is, what has been the impact of COVID-19 on your research? But we would like you to focus specifically on how research is being conducted, the priority areas and day-to-day activities. So Professor Hoffman, please do the honors.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. And this was a great introduction and a great warm-up for this session. So congratulations. Yeah, you sent us these questions before, so I got together a few thoughts on this. And I would say the first thing that actually came to my mind when I thought about how did COVID-19 affect my work, the first thing would be acceleration. So everything suddenly needed to go really fast. There were very tight deadlines for new proposals, for new calls for proposals. There were all these preprint manuscripts that needed to be commented on, and everybody put so much pressure on it. Everything needed to happen very fast. So that was, I think, my first reaction, a huge acceleration. The second one was an explosion of work, because in addition to the regular stuff that already filled my days quite well, actually, there was all this new stuff that suddenly we needed to do. All these new studies to look at, or the ongoing studies, they became very complicated, and everything was more time consuming and more laborious, to rearrange the study you were doing. There were suddenly lots of, many more reviews to do for journals, for funding organizations. A lot of interviews needed to be done because the press contacted me, commenting with questions, commenting on recently published or preprint studies. So I experienced that as a huge explosion. Then, of course, there was a content change. As an epidemiologist at the University of Düsseldorf, of course, we were also involved in quite a few COVID studies, either directly or indirectly. So that was, of course, a lot of new things also to work about, to get to know. A lot of evidence synthesis that needed to be done because various governmental organizations wanted to have kind of statements about various questions of prevention and treatment. And the final thing, I think, is what I noticed, a huge interest and engagement in working together, collaborating on, getting evidence together, making it accessible for decision makers, work in committees to come up with statements that we could pass on, and there were a lot of people suddenly coming together, getting together, really wanting to work on this and participate in these activities. So these were the, I think, the 4 most important changes that I noticed during the pandemic.
Thank you so much, Professor Hoffman. And Professor Cajavinas, the floor is yours.
Very similar to Barbara, actually. Basically, the new situation introduced new challenges and I think accelerated ongoing trends. So there's a clear shift to the digital world that was there, but it all basically goes much, much quicker and affects our research. So there are obviously effects on the day-to-day, what Barbara has been saying, the loneliness, the difficulty in contact, the protection of our personnel and our field workers, etc., etc. This has been among the hardest periods, I think, that we have worked ever. The second thing is the reorientation of our research. It was interesting to see that about 25% said they started doing COVID before, when you had the questions and answer, and reorientation in many ways. Well, it became even more clear, the interconnection between different aspects of that define health at a planetary scale. And also it brought forward areas that were marginalized before in environmental health research. And the obvious one is infections. If we think about our conferences, there was very little on infections and the environment. This will become major. It will take some time because it's difficult to change, but it will become a major thing. A third thing is new methods that were there, but they're accelerating. Think of biomarker-based research. We had, for those of us who continued doing research, as many of us during this period, we had to switch our protocols into, say, small volume samples. We had to do lots of stuff with finger prick blood, not anymore venous puncture. And these are things that have come and they will stay. And obviously all the online connection with our participants in our studies and the use of sensors and maps. And these are things that are here to stay. They happened, we changed, and it is more efficient in many aspects, and we have new methods. The fourth thing that I think is important that we have understood is the problems with the global research and global governance of public health, but global research. We really have a very big problem here. And I don't have time to go into that, but it is it is crucial if we want to manage this type of crisis, both in terms of infectious disease or, the climate change issues.
Thank you very much, Professor Cajavinas. And finally, Professor Ames.
Yeah, well, thank you. I'm obviously echoing many of the comments that my colleagues have made, but in my case also, I would say that it had direct effect on my work, which is largely these days focused on climate change and environmental change more broadly, because the COVID pandemic resulted in a reduction of greenhouse gas emissions of about 7%, which is roughly the percentage you need to reach the Paris Agreement if you replicate that every year. But it's very clear that this is not the way to decarbonize the economy. It's causing social catastrophe. In fact, it's actually the way not to decarbonize the economy. And it really reminds us that we need to prepare well in advance, that if you try to suddenly change direction, it has devastating impacts on our economy and on society more generally. So it's caused me to think about also how to emerge from COVID. And I think it's really important in times of difficulty to have a vision, a positive vision of where you want to go and the kind of society in which we all want to live in, where the environment and public health is much more central to policy. And I suppose one of the good things about COVID is that suddenly public health in general, epidemiology, is now at the forefront of public policy. Politicians can't ignore it. And suddenly it's exposing the fact that public health, including environmental epidemiology, is really a crucial player in the policy arena. And it's because we've been marginalized, I would say, from policy discussions in the past, in the past, that we probably now are having this position center stage. So that's one thing, is speculating on how we can emerge from COVID in a much more resilient and low carbon way than we are at the present time. And we need to decarbonize the economy, of course, very rapidly. The second point is that although we're all confined largely to our homes, in some ways we've become more interconnected. I mean, for example, tomorrow morning I'm going to be talking in Seoul in Korea. This morning I was talking in Germany. You know, a few days ago it was somewhere else in Spain or the US, or, you know, it's quite extraordinary. I mean, before I would have thought, well, perhaps I have to get on a plane, you know, to give a lecture, which is madness, really. But we were all kind of hooked on that kind of international conference junkie circuit, which hopefully we're off forever now. I can't imagine how it's credible to hold a big international conference and fly people around the world with all the environmental damage that that causes. So that's probably a good thing. The third point I would make is that you have to be prepared to take on slightly unfamiliar tasks. So as Barbara and Manolis have said, you know, you get approached to give your views on different aspects of the COVID pandemic. So I'm on this COVID commission, which is not really my expertise, but sometimes it's good to come in as a more generalist perspective. And sometimes you can fill in gaps. One of our students at the moment, a Kenyan student, is training community health workers in how to prevent and manage COVID. And you know what? They're doing incredibly well in rural Kenya. We've had very, very few deaths from COVID right now. And we've got, you know, she has developed a whole cadre of community health workers, including youth, that are using social media to transmit the message about how to prevent COVID and how to prevent it spreading. So I think actually, if you look at it objectively, many low-income countries have done a lot better than many European countries in terms of preventing the spread of COVID. And that causes us to reevaluate, I think, the way in which we organize care, the balance between prevention, primary prevention and treatment, and the balance also between tertiary care in hospitals, which is very labor intensive, 50% mortality rate once you're on a ventilator, and the importance of primary care, good old basic primary care. There's a lot that can be done to prevent people getting very sick. And one of the conclusions I have is that we need to put much more emphasis on primary care and public health research, rather than putting all our resources into randomized trials in very sick people, in whose benefits are always going to be relatively small. So I think it's opened our eyes to different ways of working, and it's also shown us some surprising truths.
Thank you so much, Professor Haynes. I am so glad that you touched on how public health is and epidemiology is now at the forefront, because politicians cannot ignore, policymakers cannot ignore, and how we've been using social media to spread the word about COVID and preparedness and just abiding by the rules and regulations set out there. And that brings me to the second question. And I want us to take a moment to reflect on how we communicate our science, how we interact with the general public, policymakers. But we should also look at it from I want you to also look at it from a place of the public's hesitance towards COVID regulations and vaccine. So how can scientists be better at communicating their science in a way that anybody on the street can understand? And how do we go beyond just what is printed, what the article is saying? How can we translate the article to something anybody can understand, so that we can start to just communicate our science in a simple form? So I would like Professor Cajavinas to go first, and then Professor Haynes second, and Professor Hoffman last. Thank you.
Hey.
I think, Masha, you have a slide for Professor Cajavinas?
So, I mean, this is a very important question, Tammy, that you're raising. And it is, I think, one of the first times that science has been so close to the general public and to the policymakers. You know, we have been first page for 1 year in all the newspapers of all the world practically. But I want to touch on one of the issues that you have raised in your questions of how do we get in contact with the society. And I don't have to do much effort to convince anybody who is on this chat here that vaccines are good for you. The problem we have, one of the problems we have, is not only the only problem we have, is that frequently discussions are done into different compartments. This is a very nice article on analyzing Facebook. So about 100 million individuals discussing about the vaccines. This is pre-pandemic at the time of the measles story in 2018, 2019. And it has analyzed the connections. The red are the bad guys, the anti-vaxxers. They are fewer than the pro-vaccine guys, the blue ones. And most people don't take a position, pro or against. But the anti-vaxxers, although they are fewer, they are more active, they have more clusters. And in the and in these graphs here, you can see, you know, they spread higher, so they increase their cluster size. But what is more important is that they are located there where most people are. While the pro-vaccine are marginalized. We are talking between ourselves. This is one of the messages. So how can we get into these other guys? And that's where the anti-vaxxers are better connected. So that is the slides. Thank you, Masa. And there is no good answer to that. You know, it is just outside our normal ways of communication in conferences or the main newspapers. And we don't have a good answer. You know, what do we do with Facebook and all the rest? There is no good answer. You know, what we thought was a democratic movement so that everybody has access to information, communication has become an anti-democratic movement very, very clearly. So there's no good response. So, and I don't have a response to that. Not only me, other people also.
Thank you very much. I hope Professor Haynes has something to add, even if it's no response, but you can elaborate on your no response.
I don't have the magic answer, Temi, but what my colleagues tell me who study vaccine confidence, and by the way, I want to say that I think really this is a field of study. And so we need to treat this like an environmental epidemiology problem. We need to say, where is this coming from? What are the diverse sources of it? Some of it is misinformation. It's people who are mistaken, who are setting out false information. Some of it is actually disinformation, which is actively pumping out false information, knowing that it's false. And we're familiar with this in the climate change field because disinformation has been very powerful in climate change for quite a few decades. And there's a wonderful book actually by Naomi Oreskes, who's an American historian, and she wrote this book called The Merchants of Doubt. And she showed how climate change denial and denial of the health effects of tobacco and a whole range of other denialism was actually pre-planned. And it was planned, it was actually supported by very powerful interests. And I think we need to study that and we need to engage with it and we need to develop effective strategies. So my colleagues who work on vaccine hesitancy tell me there are three key factors that we need to address. One is confidence. Do you have confidence in the person who's talking to you about vaccines? And we know that certainly health professionals have a high level of, they do inspire confidence in the population. Actually, if you look at the opinion polls, nurses come pretty well top. Doctors, I don't know where environmental epidemiologists come. They don't really feature in the opinion polls, but let's assume they're pretty high up. But I think working with colleagues who are on frontline positions like nurses and so on, to give them the kind of evidence and enable them to transmit and to communicate the right science could be a really important role. The second thing they tell me is important is convenience. So there's often a difference between what people say they'll do and what they actually do. So they might say, well, I'm not sure if I want the vaccine. I don't know if I'll be bothered. I'm a bit worried about the effects. But if you say, oh, well, look, your family doctor, you know, just down the road is offering the vaccine and you can go and get it in half an hour, a lot of them will go and they'll get it. So it's partly also about making it very, very convenient. And the third is about complacency. If people feel that the vaccine is not relevant to them because they're low risk, so what do they care? So then it's a question of saying, well, okay, but we don't know what the effects of long COVID are. And the effects of long COVID are sure going to be much worse than the effects of any vaccine, which is only going to last for a couple of hours, the adverse effects. So addressing that complacency head on and saying, well, it is relevant to you because we don't know what the long-term effects are going to be in you. And by the way, you know, your loved ones are vulnerable. And if you get COVID, you're going to transmit it to them. So focusing those messages, I think, is going to be really important. So let's treat it like a part of an epidemiological puzzle, but also work with colleagues from other disciplines, from frontline health professionals to others, to improve our communication skills and work in areas like doing podcasts. I mean, our podcasts at the school have become very, very popular. They're amongst the most popular, you know, they're up there in the top 20 of all the podcasts in the world now. So podcasts, a lot of people like listening to podcasts when they're walking around. So yeah, there's a lot of novel ways in which we can approach this, I think. Thank you.
And Professor Hoffman?
Yeah, well, I couldn't agree more with what I've already heard. And I think I have a few very, very practical aspects to raise regarding communication. So first of all, I think we need to be efficient with what we're doing because all of our time is limited. And we as researchers, of course, have certain strengths. And I mean, we have a very specific education. And so we should use that to its most advantage. So one thing, let me start with the don'ts. I think we need to take care that we are not spending all of our energy on is to preach to the choir, which means, I mean, of course, it's important to have conferences amongst ourselves and to discuss scientific findings and all these things. That's all very, very important. But then we need to go out and talk to the others, other specialties, other people, you know, other policymakers, regulators, whatever. So we shouldn't spend all of our time, of our very valuable time, to preach to the choir. The second thing, I think what's important to not do is we shouldn't overemphasize single studies. Because sure enough, the next study will come out, it'll show the exact opposite, and then that will reduce our credibility everywhere. So instead of, you know, making a huge story about, you know, you have this nice manuscript and it's great and it's being accepted in the Lancet or somewhere else, still stay modest because a few days later, a different study can be published that shows the opposite. So don't overemphasize single studies, but rather rely on, you know, when you're talking to the public, rely on evidence synthesis. So then I have a few do's, and the first one would be learn to communicate. And I know that's really difficult, and so a lot of people, I mean, it's nice, we sit in our office and we do our stuff, and then we go to a specialist conference and we understand each other, but that's not the language we need for talking to people, to other people. That's not the language that you can talk to a journalist or to a policymaker. So we really, sometimes I think it's very painful, but we need to simplify what we're saying at the cost of maybe being not so precise as we would like to be. You know, as scientists, we always like to be very precise in what we're saying and get it out completely correct. But that doesn't work when you're talking to journalists. So you have to learn to kind of be a little bit more, you know, to summarize more at the cost of important details. But that's I think very hard to learn, very difficult to do and painful. But that's what we learn to do. Then what Andy already said, I think we have to immunize against the merchants of doubt. And there's of course a lot of ways you can do that. and there's a lot of target groups you need to address. And I think as scientists, we really need to be very careful who are our target groups. Personally, I don't think it's very effective if I'm on Twitter all day and trying to reach the general public. I know that I'm not good at this and this doesn't work. I think as scientists, it's much more important that, first of all, of course, we talk to policymakers, regulators, and talk in their, learn to talk in their language. But we need to talk to multipliers that can then take our message and really bring it in the, to the whole public. And for that, I believe that scientific societies play a huge role. We need to get together in the scientific societies, get active there, and then use these societies as multipliers for our messages. Because I don't think it's very effective if every scientist now starts their own Twitter account and does it him or herself. So that's these are some practical experiences from my work in scientific societies. And I think we should really use them and use their connections to spread the news among the general public.
Thank you very much, Professor Hoffman. And I hope everybody in the audience are really listening and taking notes. And please don't forget, if you have any questions, put them in the chat. We'll take them later. I'm going to hand over to Masha now. So carry on, Vic.
Thank you, Tammy. I think communication in science is such an important topic, and really learning how to communicate is really important lessons to take from home from this plenary, especially because with us, we have more than 100 young researchers. But how to learn to communicate is a challenge maybe, and as you said, Professor Hoffman said, very painful as well. But it was impressive for me to see the power of communication at social media that Professor Cajavinas shown, and that really spreading the health information through social media can be very powerful. And maybe we can use that tool as well among other tools that Professor Hoffman mentioned. And I would like to come back to some answers I analyzed from the poll, from the last question about opportunities that pandemic brought to us. And many people answered and identified opportunities of international collaboration, of course, and to work remotely and to connect remotely with other researchers. People also reflected on improving mental resilience and improving balance between work and home. Working from home, someone see as a challenge or advantage of pandemic. But I would like to ask you, when we think about the future and any potential future crisis, either pandemic or environmental crisis, what can be the role for future young researchers? And are there any lessons we should take from this pandemic, or any mistakes we made we should definitely avoid in the future in a similar situation? And I would like to start with Professor Ains and then Professor Hoffman and Professor Cajavinas.
Thanks. Well, I think there are a number of opportunities in facing potential future threats. And I think they fall into a number of different categories. One is trying to understand the mechanisms, in this case, the mechanisms by which COVID was having its impact, its transmission in the community and so on. So understanding the basic pathways and the epidemiology that's causing the adverse effects of whatever this crisis, whether it's infectious disease crisis or an environmental crisis in the future. The second, I think, is in helping populations to adapt rapidly to such a crisis. And that may be in terms of, let's take an environmental crisis, it might be around strengthening the resilience of food chains, for example, showing how we can create more resilient food systems and healthcare systems as well, trying to increase the resilience of healthcare systems to withstand shocks. And environmental epidemiology and other branches of epidemiology have important roles, I think, in increasing the resilience of health systems, but also other systems that are relevant to health. And the third area is what I would call mitigation, or in climate change, we call it mitigation, which is reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So it's about reducing the risk of future catastrophes and future threats. And, you know, if we look at the way in which research is funded, a lot of research is funded as kind of responsive research to try to address emerging threats, but not really so much research to actually prevent the threats emerging in the first place. And certainly when one looks, for example, at disaster, the funds that go into disasters, most of it goes into disaster responsiveness and not into disaster preparedness. So I think there's an important role in trying to strengthen the capacity of society to deal with these shocks, but also to reduce the environmental footprint of society, thus to make these shocks less likely and less intense when they happen. So what can young researchers do? Well, I think there's a number of things we can do. First of all, what's very clear is you need transdisciplinary research. You know, a single discipline, even a discipline as great as epidemiology, can't work alone. We've already talked about communication sciences. You know, we need to work with social sciences, people who think about these kind of issues all the time. So I think it's a question of reaching out and learning the language of other disciplines. We're not going to be experts in it, but we need to understand where it fits in the bigger picture and which disciplines are important for us to partner with in trying to tackle some of these complex issues. And certainly in recent years, I've been working with disciplines I've never worked with before. There might be agricultural scientists, there might be behavioral scientists, anthropologists, mathematical modelers, a whole range of different people. And this is really exciting, but this is the way in which one can tackle some of these interconnected challenges. The final point I want to make is about the pandemic of poor quality research, which I think that Barbara and others referred to as well. I mean, one of the things that's been kind of shocking actually with COVID is just how much really poor quality research there is out there. Some of it, you know, wouldn't even be passed through a kind of pre-undergraduate course. I mean, when you think, for example, of some of the so-called science that was supposed to back up hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin based on 6 patients, non-randomized, I mean, come on. And yet this really drove the kind of the agenda for quite a long time. So I think we need to be much quicker at responding to poor quality and fake science than we were. We were caught on the back foot and we didn't respond properly. And as Barbara said, we should be focusing on syntheses, not single studies. But there was an awful lot of poor quality research around. And I think we could do much better. And I think young researchers could do much better to arm themselves in the future to say, okay, we know now this is going to happen when we get a crisis. How do we actually collect the science from the beginning that's more robust? And how do we communicate it? So lots of tremendous opportunities. And I think it's a very exciting time to be in this field.
Yeah, well, I can actually only reiterate what Andy already said, because these were the points that I also noted for this question. First, the interconnectedness, and in 2 ways. As researchers, we need to connect outside of our silos and, you know, go to other fields, but also the interconnectedness in understanding what's happening in the world and for health, and to take this, for example, for me, it was actually, it was one of the IS Global seminar series that really pointed me towards this connection between zoonoses and climate change and mobility of our society, and how this is all connected, and how we are destroying, with the way we're living, how we are destroying our ecosystem and making these zoonoses more probable. So to understand how connected we are, and that our decisions, lifestyle decisions, affect the probability of the next zoonosis, for example. To really understand this, I think we need to talk to others, and we also need to communicate this interconnectedness. And I was quite surprised that by now in the German mainstream media, this is actually being discussed. I mean, none of that was taken up at the beginning of COVID, but now it's in the regular media and people talk about it. And I think that's a great success that we actually made this happen, and that people read about it in the mainstream media now. And the second really important point is also what Andy already said, and it's very nicely summarized in a European Respiratory Journal editorial from last year, first authored by Dick Hederick, and it's called Go Slow to Go Fast, a plea for sustained scientific rigor in air pollution research during the COVID-19 pandemic. And I think that very, very nicely summarizes the mistakes that have been done at the beginning when people, just rushed to get out bad science, and how much of the trust and the confidence we need is being destroyed by this rush to get out something that's in print and that gets taken up by the media. We really need to stay calm and conduct our studies with the highest scientific rigor that we can muster, and not get tempted by the quick publication and newspaper article. So we really need to avoid bad science to stay credible scientists. I think that's very important.
I agree with everything that others said. So I will refer, what should the young scientists do? I'll refer to a saying that is attributed to Max Planck, that science advances one funeral at a time. And he was referring to the fact that science many times works in compartments and has dogmas that are very difficult and methods that are very difficult to renew. And so this doesn't mean that you should assassinate Barbara, Andy, and me, but it does mean that really, if we are talking about a new way of doing science and policy, what Barbara and Andy and many others have said about interdisciplinary research and interconnectedness, local, global, this is your role actually to bring the new science. What came in the surface with COVID. It really was there, but it became evident. It's in the newspapers. And I think that is your role, just renew things. And to this extent, what Max Planck was saying is correct. And just at the personal level, I think I recovered the interest of infectious diseases. I had done some infectious disease work, and I just find it passionate, just passionate, and I'm spending a lot of time on COVID, in fact, nowadays. And so if there's something to say, just do something that motivates you, that is a passion. Forget about the boring stuff, do the important stuff. That's it.
That's good.
Thank you so much to our speakers for generously sharing knowledge with us today. I have so many notes here, but we are a little behind time, and I think we should take some questions from the audience. And I just want to echo one of the theme of conversation that has been going on in the past 30 minutes is just re-echoing the idea of we need interdisciplinary approach. We need to not work in the silos. There has to be collaboration. And I want you to know, I just wanted to remind you, we are at a conference of young people. This is the time for you to network with other people, start creating that collaboration that can last for a while, a long time, however long you want to do that. And the Swifty Page app has made it easy for you. You just need to swipe and match with people who share the same interests as you, and set up a meeting, discuss your research, discuss your work, and just network. We should try as much as possible to collaborate with others. And we have the time now. We're young, we have the time now. We can start building those relationships. So I have a question here from Evan, and the question is really pertaining to the idea that in recent times, there have been a lot of public health practitioners and epidemiologists and experts who have now become sort of like the spokesperson with regards to sharing information and insight about COVID-19. So what happens? And they've been doing this on large stages, in the debates, at talk shows, at news events. So what happens, and how should we be cautious when these experts share very strong opposing opinion? What do we do? How can we be cautious of this, and how can we handle the situation? I would like for Professor Ains to answer this.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting question. And of course, in science, we don't want to discourage legitimate debate, and that's the way we move on. We improve our understanding by engaging with others and hopefully modifying our understanding as the evidence changes. I think it is important to try and understand the roots or the reasons for differences of views. Is it because two people have different value systems, so they weigh different outcomes differently? So somebody might say, well, I weigh economic recovery as being more important than saving the lives of people over 75 or whatever. So is that the reason they're coming up with different views? Or is it because the science is uncertain, because we don't actually know whether a particular intervention is appropriate or not? In which case science can help to illuminate that, because part of the role of science is to reduce uncertainty. So we can say, okay, there's a genuine difference of opinion here because the science is unclear. And so as scientists, we can actually then tackle that problem, reduce the uncertainty, either by reducing it by, better adjustment for confounders, if you like, from an epidemiological perspective, better designed trials, bigger trials, and so on. So there's ways of dealing with that. And then, of course, some of the opposing views can be because people have got special interests that they don't declare. And this we see this, of course, in climate change, maybe not so much in COVID, although one wonders, some of these very strong anti-vaxxers, are also linked to the use of unproven kind of health remedies and so on, alternative remedies, and we know a lot of people are making a lot of money out of pushing supplements, which there is no evidence, all sorts of alternative remedies. So there may be an element of self-interest in some of this as well. And unfortunately, we always find a few maverick scientists who actually like the idea of being prominent. They like to disagree because that's the way in which they get their prominence, not through just doing good science and contributing to the overall body of knowledge. It's by stimulating policy and by being in opposition is how they get their followers. And that's a difficult psychological, because they're getting obviously a lot of psychological feedback, reinforcement, if you like, of bad behavior by being in opposition to scientific, the scientific truth of the matter. So it's a question of analyzing, I think, why people are opposing each other and whether there are good grounds and whether science can help to reduce that polarization of views. And in some cases it can. In other cases it can't, because it's actually not due for scientific reasons. It's because of, conflicts of interest, which are unexpressed sometimes, or very different value systems, which place completely different weight on different outcomes. So it's important to try and understand what those are. But undoubtedly, young scientists have a really important role in trying to expose and understand some of these scientific debates and trying to tackle and trying to diagnose the reasons for them and trying to tackle the root causes of these differences of opinion.
Thank you very much, Professor Haynes. Masha, do you have a question from the audience?
Yes, actually, there are two very interesting comments from Paulina and Meltem about the challenge of publishing and very often poorly designed fake research that are published even by prestige journals. And there is a huge pressure about publishing or perishing. And we can see impressive increase of publication under COVID-19 key terms. So my question is to Professor Hoffman, maybe you can address this. How as scientific community we can ensure that science we are publishing is good quality science?
Well, that's a tricky question. I mean, of course, there's certain mechanisms built in the whole publishing system that is meant to preserve or ensure high quality. And it starts, of course, in your own research group and in your institute, and then it's with the journals, with the peer review system. I mean, these are all very important different steps of quality assurance and quality control of each individual publication that should prevent the worst. And of course, it doesn't always work, but I mean, in the field that we control in our own working groups and institutes, we can ensure that these mechanisms are in place and that they're working. Okay, but then there's also, let's say, this the pressure that's put upon academia, especially young scientists, as you already said, publish or perish. And this pressure comes from various institutions, and not all of them are, let's say, in our power to influence directly. But of course, I mean, those of us who are more senior already and play a role in hiring of people and you know, calling people into professorships and things like that, I think we have the responsibility to see to it that it's not the number of publications or the impact factor that's important, but that the quality and the relevance of the research is important. And also, I think we need to work towards changing the system wherever we can, and I know that it's limited when it comes to setting up these rules and preventing that individual universities or institutions come up with very disadvantageous rules about, you know, the number of impact factors that you have to collect in order to get hired. So that is something I think we as researchers need to see to it, that the system doesn't get out of hand, and that this publish or perish culture is hopefully not increasing, but maybe even we can maybe even fight against this. So these are two different levels to, I think, ensure that yeah, we are not overwhelmed by bad science in the journals.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Hoffman. While we wait for more questions, we have about 5 minutes left in this round of questions. I will use my power as a chair right now to ask Professor Cajavinas a question. So my question is, we've already spoken about how we need to, you know, earn that skill when it comes to communication. What is it that in this pandemic that you feel was lacking, a research area, a research skill, a focus that you could see that was lacking, and this is an opportunity for young scientists to learn this skill right now, or be more visible, or more just own the skill, start working in this area that would help us in the future? So just coming down to, what are the practical things young researchers can start doing apart from communication skills that you could tell was really missing in this whole pandemic?
Oh, that's not an easy question, Tammy. One of the things I found that was frustrating was the slowness. We went slow. Our response, you know, in epidemiology was slow. And I would have liked to go much quicker. So it would have been great if we had the systems to produce knowledge quicker, you know, from valid studies. And I'm coming back to what Barbara and Andy have been saying. I was seeing all, you know, mental health and COVID, and I was seeing all these pretty dubious studies being published, you know, in terms of methodology, you know, very selected samples. And I couldn't push enough to go quicker with my nice, big, you know, valid study to get the, you know, what I think are much better results. So is this something can we do something here, you know, in terms of as a discipline, be quicker? Or we just, you know, we are a discipline known to, you know, we publish a lot, epidemiologists, but, you know, we have our times, you know, we don't go as quick as some of the lab guys. And this is an advantage for us because we have time to think and, you know, be very secure. It is a disadvantage in a situation of crisis. So, you know, maybe one of the things you should think, and we should think, you know, it's the same questions eventually, not only young, it's for everybody. You know, is there something we have to do in terms of epidemiology generally to be better prepared to respond quickly to questions? And I think there are. And I totally agree, with what Barbara and Andy have been saying, that we cannot push more than what, we can do. There's no point in getting crap outside as results. And if it is crap, we have to acknowledge it. These are the limitations of the study, of our findings. We cannot do better now. We will do better, in 2 months. But we should acknowledge it. So that was my frustration. This could, this period, I would have liked to be more like some of the lab guys who would get results in a month.
Thank you very much, Professor Cajavinas. Masha, do you have any questions?
Yes, I just checked the chat and I'm happy to see some interaction, that people shared some nice resources about podcasts and how we can improve communication skills. But maybe due to the lack of time, Tammy, we can move on with our last section of the plenary.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so now in the last session of our plenary, this is the part where Masha does the honors of announcing the finalists from the Speak Talk.
Yes.
I hope you voted, because your votes definitely counts here. So Masha, do you have the results now?
We will announce finalists very soon, but before that, maybe we can give the final words to our speakers. So each of you, if you can summarize the most important lessons that young researchers can take home from today's plenary session. So we still have 100 people with us. That means that we were very interesting today, and maybe something you consider as really important message for all of us in our future. So maybe we can start with whoever wants to start.
Professor
Let's make
Haynes
it. Yeah, why not?
Yeah, why not? Final words, Professor Haynes.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So, well, what is the sort of headline message? I think it is a message of hope. I think actually we're coming through a very difficult period for humanity right now, and there are other big challenges coming over the horizon very fast at us. But we have the capacity to address these. And I think that environmental epidemiology is going to play a really crucial role in trying to create and address some of the solutions. So I think we need to be more solution focused. Of course, we need observational epidemiology to establish causal relationships, to test hypotheses and so on, to look at different pathways linking exposures to outcomes. But I think more and more we need to be focusing on solutions, equitable solutions that will take us to a more sustainable society, to stimulate and to contribute to the wider than scientific debate, but also the debate about what kind of society we want to live in. Because with a population of 8 to 10 billion people, which is what we're going to have, during this century on the planet, a small planet, the question is, what can we contribute to a discourse which says, well, what kind of policies and practices could we put in place to sustain the health of those 8 to 10 billion people in the foreseeable future? And I think we have a lot to offer in that respect, because we do have the data analysis capacity to at least begin to articulate some of those solutions. I think Barbara made the point about research synthesis and the need to avoid putting undue weight on single studies. And I do think, I was a clinical practitioner, for many years. So the Cochrane collaboration had enormous impact on my clinical practice, because for the first time, people were giving me synthesized evidence that I could actually use and I had confidence in. If you look back before that, it was all like some great professor said you should do something, so you did it. And then we found out, well, that was killing a lot of people, because often the advice they gave was wrong, because they didn't actually know how to evaluate evidence. They thought they were a specialist in a particular narrow topic, but they had no concept of how to evaluate evidence. And I think in the field of epidemiology, we do have a lot of strengths in evaluating evidence and doing so rigorously. But I do think we need to look beyond our own silo. So reach out to other disciplines that would help to enrich our work. And we've talked about some of those today, but the social sciences, the humanities, communication sciences, which are linked, I think, to social sciences in many ways. I think these are all important disciplines that we can work together with, to work constructively, to give an evidence-based vision for the future. So I want to end on that positive note.
Thank you very much, Professor Haynes. Professor Cajavinas, would you like to go now?
Yeah, sure. If something has been shown through this crisis is the importance of research. This is more than obvious in treating, because there's a lot of discussion on treating and preventing the disease and preventing the factors that produce the disease. So it is very, very clear. Research is tremendously important, also for economic reasons, but basically to prevent major catastrophes in human life and in planetary destruction. The second message is that the globe is a globe, and we are one human species, independent from where you are. And the COVID-19 showed how vulnerable we are everywhere in this earth. People have different capacities, economic capacities to react. Obviously, there are huge inequalities, but basically it put us, all of us, same place. Everybody was affected by this pandemic. And obviously, when we talk about the globe is a globe, it's not only humans, it's the planet. And it, again, it brought forward the need to consider the health of the planet as a major issue for the health of humans. So, which together with the fact that the system, was clearly unprepared to address these issues, could tell us go into politics to solve it. But, that's not the role of science. We are is a role of citizens, obviously, but we have a role as scientists to provide the evidence, and also different type of evidence, not only classical observational studies, but extremely important, implementation research, policy research that we have not been doing as much. So these these basically messages, research is important, and we are one Earth.
Yeah, well, I couldn't agree more, Manolis and Andy. Yeah, and I have, one more little aspect here to add. I think from time to time, we really have to get out of our treadmill, have to stop to think, why are we doing this? And really remember, I mean, we do this, I think most of us, because we care for the planet and for the people who live on it. And I think that's really important to, make this clear to yourself once in a while, that this is the motivation why we do all this hard work, because it is hard work usually. And the second thing, I think, to keep up our motivation, and ISEE Young is very good at this, I believe. Go out and find friends among your colleagues and then do fun stuff with them. I mean, that's what has really kept me going in those phases when work has been really depressing because you're not successful, because whatever your proposals don't get funded, or because your manuscript doesn't get accepted and you feel like nothing works for you anymore. But then when you go out with your colleagues and you have fun, and everybody knows that I love dancing, so go out and do stuff and do fun stuff. I think that really, gives you your motivation back at those times when you're down and low. So I think ISEE Young is a good place to say that.
Thank you very much, Professor Hoffman. And I just want to add that my supervisor is very particular on me, making sure I take a walk every day. He just, every meeting he says, have you taken a walk today? And I'm like, I will go later on. But so I'm glad you brought that up, because we need to find ways to get out of our work and go outside, take a bit of a breather, come back with a clear mind and approach things again. Before we go on to announcing the finalists, I just want to say thank you to everyone. I'm sorry we couldn't take all of your questions because we're a little bit behind time, but there's been an interesting conversation going on in the chat. So please take a look and see if there's something for you to learn. I've seen people sharing links and all of that. So please do copy those links and engage with the conversation and carry on with the engagement off the chat and continue on the app. So Masha, do you have anything for us now?
Yes, I'm so happy to have this opportunity to announce the 3 finalists from today's Speed Talk. And as you know, We have 3 finalists from today. We will select and vote for the 3 finalists tomorrow, and all of them will compete for the first place. And I just want to say that already participating in such event is a huge success, and I want to congratulate all for participating. But the best 3 presentations today were, and I think we will have opportunity to see them, so we can really congratulate them and recognize them. First one is Alexandra Burgler. She's coming from Swiss TPH, and her title of speech was Beyond Seasonal Suffering, Effects of Pollen on Cardiorespiratory Health, Cognitive Performance and Allergic Symptoms. Hello, Alexandra.
Hello.
Second one, welcome. Second one is Yikun Ma. She's coming from Yale School of Public Health, and my apologies if I did not pronounce correctly. The title of her speech was Role of Meteorological Factors in Transmission of COVID-19 in the United States. Hello.
Hi.
And the third one is Sarah Lucht. She's coming from Heinrich Heine University Düsseldorf, from the same institution as our Professor Hoffman. The title of her speech was Sex-Based Differences in the Association between Long-Term Air Pollution, Noise, and Brain Structure in the Default Mode. Hello, Sarah, and we're so happy to see that you have such a lovely company. This is so nice. We're sending a lot of hugs and kisses, and we congratulations to all of you, and we want to wish you a lot of luck for tomorrow main competition at the last plenary session. So one big applause to all of you.
Well done. And on that note, I know a lot of people have been asking where can one learn about communication skills and all of that. But if you're part of the Swiss School of Public Health, there was a course called Flash Talk. It's a flying Flash Talk where the course is all about taking 3 minutes to explain your science in the simplest way to just anybody. So I would encourage you to look into that. It might be helpful for you. I did it last year and I won, so you can try it. So thank you to everyone for being here. I think this is the part where we close the plenary. I'd like to say a very big thank you and just extend my gratitude to our speakers, Professor Barbara Hoffman, Professor Sir Andrew Ains, and Professor Manolis Cajavinas. Thank you so much for being kind and for being generous with all of the knowledge and that you've impacted on us today and just giving us your time today. We're so grateful for it. And for everyone that attended and still to the end, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got something out of it. And it's been a great time for me and Masha to be your chair today. We're so glad for the opportunity. And we would like for you to enjoy the rest of the event. There's another session tomorrow. So see you in one of the rooms, see you in one of the events. Masha, over to you.
Emi, thank you so much for reminding me. When you mention other events, I would like to share some screens so everyone can see other activities you can join tomorrow. And just give me a second. So you should be able to see a few slides shared from our organizing committee. So as you see today, we are finishing our first day. You can also download the app using this code or finding app at the store, Apple Store or Android Store using Swiss TPH, where you can find everything about this event. Maybe I'm not fully sure what is this
is
about.
the leaderboard for people who have been using the app and interacting and networking. So Benedict from INSERM is currently leading. Well done, Benedict. And I see Apolline is trying to catch up. Apolline, come on, do better. Do it for Swiss TPH. I want to see you at the leaderboard. It's not a competition, but we want to see more interaction, okay?
But I can see someone will win a prize, so better be active, and who knows, maybe you will get something really nice. And we will announce the final in plenary. And also very interesting activity, Pilates class with Marcela tomorrow early morning. So for everyone who is getting up so early, you're welcome to join. For sure, it will be very interesting and very healthy for your body and prepare you for the whole day of conference as well. Tammy, would you invite other participants to Bouvet as well?
And tomorrow you will have a chance to meet with some editors, of which Professor Cajavinas will be in attendance. So please put this in your calendar, make sure you start. So we have editors from Environmental Epidemiology, Environmental International, Environmental Health Perspective, Environmental Pollution, Occupation and Environmental Science. So it's, and also the ISEE president to be there. So it's all back to the conversation of our research output and making sure we're producing quality research that we publish. So please put this in your calendar. It's about 45 minutes for you to interact with your editors. Thank you.
So thank you, everyone. Have a nice evening.
Have a good evening.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for this great session.
It was a pleasure. Thank you so much for being here, Prof.